welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. This is Jessica. I am your host, and I'm here with the author of The Shape of What Remains, Lisa C. Taylor. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm very happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So, The Shape of What Remains it's a book that was very emotional to read as somebody who has experienced an extreme traumatic loss and just sort of what I've said this a few times in the last few podcasts because somehow grief books or books that deal with grief have been coming to me lately, but just sort of like that freeze or malaise that you deal with after tragic loss. You know, for me, it was my parents, not my child, but I do have children. So, you know, it's a lot to think about. So I wanted to once again welcome you, Lisa, and tell us about The Shape of What Remains and what brought you to writing this book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking that. The book is born out of a short story that was called Monuments that was published in 2015 in a short story collection called Growing a New Tale. I have 5 books that are published in Ireland, and that was one of them. But when I wrote the story, I knew it was a longer story. I absolutely knew it was, and I just didn't have time in my life to write it then. You know, I was working full time. I just didn't have time. So I sort of, did what a lot of writers did, and I put it aside, knowing I would get back to it. And every once in a while, I would like jot down notes because Teresa just stayed in my head. She was there to stay. And then I just kept working on it a little at a time and in that time I was teaching, I was working, and I also I'm also a poet, and I also had a collection of poetry that came out. So I was really, really busy. And it's a lot of balls in the air with a novel. So I really started working on it fervently, I think, when COVID hit, because I had bigger chunks of time. I was teaching online then. And as I started to do it, her voice just got stronger and stronger for me. And I realized that I had to keep going with it. I had to, I had to listen to her. So I know it sounds weird to say you have voices in your head. No, not to you, but I do. And she was a really strong character, and she lived in my head, and she would not let me go. And she's snarky. You read the book, so you know that she has a really strong voice. And I felt like I have to represent this, and she wants her story told. So I felt like I had to do it. So I started to put a lot more into it. And when you talk about tragedy, and I don't know that you knew this backstory, but it is a little bit in my dedication in the end. 3 years into working on this book, my next door neighbor at the time, I lived in Connecticut then, I now live in Colorado. Her 6-year-old daughter was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, and she's exactly the same age as this character's daughter who dies. And, this was already 3 years into writing it, so it wasn't an event that stimulated my writing it, but it did make me research a lot more about grief and a lot more about parents who lose children. And that's how I found Compassionate Friends and was able to direct her to that, which really turned out to be a lifesaver for her. So yeah, I mean, it's life imitates art all the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's interesting that you began this during COVID, which was like a year of collective grieving, if not more.
Yep,
A
absolutely.
year of collective grieving. Because when I think about the fact that people say it started it began and the big, shutdown was 5 years ago, I still can't believe it. I'm like, that just happened. There's no way. And that's, again, like with Teresa being frozen in this moment and frozen in this loss.
Hmm.
I think on a very, very small level, a lot of us, not all of us, several people moved on, but a lot of us get that. A lot of us
Yep.
understand that post-COVID, which kind of leads me very naturally into the next thing I wanted to ask you about or talk to you about, as somebody who has experienced intense grief and guilt over loss. I did find your depiction so accurate. And maybe this is a little personal, but just in general, I don't think everybody really understands unless you're that close to it. Being that you were close to it, but it wasn't you personally, what do you think people need to understand about grief and relating to friends and family who are experiencing it? And I guess, relating to the book, Teresa being who she was it difficult to sort of show that through her character?
No, because she kind of directed me, but I do want to respond to the first part of that, which is that grief is not linear. And we have this linear thing in our culture, which is okay, person dies, you do this, and yes, it's good. We have the funeral, we do this, we do this, we do that, and then you're over it. You move on with your life. That's not how grief happens. And I was a therapist for 18 years before I went back and got an MFA. And I actually worked in a school system where a lot of kids had lost parents, strangely. It was a middle school, so that doesn't usually happen. And I worked with a social worker who was much more of an expert than I was doing grieving groups for these kids. And I still remember arguing with a math teacher who was like, whatever the kid's name was, Megan's needs to do her math homework. And I said, Megan's mother has cancer and she's dying. And she said, well, Megan needs to do her math homework. And I said, it's really not on her mind now. And she said, well, it would be good for her. It would distract her. And I think that is the myth that we have, is like distraction is what we want to do. That is so not true. And in my novel, Luke does that. So he is the example of what you do when you throw yourself into your work because you don't want to deal with the grief. And if you read the novel, you come to find out that it will get him at some point, because you just can only tamp things down for so long. So her paralysis, while it's kind of extreme, and many people who have deep grief can still function through it, it's not linear. And, if she could, as she describes, she can see a commercial on television with a mother who's helping her kid through, the kid who's helping the mother through seasonal allergies or something, and it freaks her out. She just like immediately bursts into tears because there's a little girl in there. Or she goes to the park and there's somebody about that age and who hasn't had the experience of being in a public place, an airport or wherever, and you see somebody who looks like someone you loved who died from the back or whatever, and then all comes back. Or you smell the cologne they used to wear, or you smell the apple pie they made, or whatever. So that's why it isn't linear. It's a cycle, and we go through it kind of our whole life. It just comes in waves. Doesn't mean we're paralyzed our whole life. And Teresa won't, we hope she won't be either. It's just a matter of that having a timetable is ridiculous, in my opinion. It's really ridiculous. And it's also kind of cruel to tell people to move on. And, and she lost a lot of friends. And I feel sad about that when I wrote it, but I think it's realistic. I think some people can't stand being around that level of grieving. They just think, get over it. We have this stoic, like our culture, get over it, move on, work, distract yourself, like that math teacher. No, you can only distract yourself so long, and you have to work it through. You have to process. And, that's what I think Teresa comes to find out, that denial only goes so far. You really got to process it. And there is no easy way to process it because we don't understand. I mean, we have no accurate explanation for why particularly children sometimes die, but they sometimes do.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I really, again, I wanted to commend just the two different ways between Luke and Teresa that you handled that, because some people being distracted is their paralysis, even though it seems like they're constantly in motion. And I know that that sounds ridiculous, but it is another form of that. Just that whole throwing yourself into work or being constantly busy, but it leads to other things in which we see with how he deals with everything. And it just again, like I do appreciate what you were just saying about, like you do feel bad about what happened with Teresa, but unfortunately it is very realistic. And I think people who are reading this hopefully will gain some empathy for that if they're ever in that position. I also wanted to talk a little bit about how you wove Teresa's various coping strategies throughout the book. I'm a big Janis Joplin fan, so I was, you don't hear enough about her lately. It's so funny because you do hear about a lot of other classic rock bands. Like my kids literally just studied the Beatles in school. But, when I was younger, my parents would talk about Joplin and Hendrix, and I don't think they're talked about enough. But also, poetry, and now knowing that you had been a therapist, how did everything just sort of work so organically for you, with the different threads to her grieving and her healing?
Thank you for asking that. I write organically, so I'm not even really sure how Joplin happened, except for the fact that I knew that yeah, obviously I created that she had a father and she has a mother who's, very honestly, extraordinarily difficult person and not somebody that understands anything. And so it was really kind of at the ninth hour that I revisited the father. But I knew that he had brought her the one gift he had given her when he disappeared when she was 14 was music and Joplin. And so she kept returning to that because as she was in despair, who knows despair better than Janis Joplin? I mean, it's kind of what she writes. And I started revisiting it because my character's a millennial and I'm not a millennial, but I really try to immerse myself in that culture and think that we pass these things on. And that was a gift she got from her father that ended up really resonating for her. So it was kind of fun to use. I didn't use actual lyrics because that's a whole other thing in novels. You got to get permission for everything. But I refer to it quite a bit, and it just resonates throughout the whole, I think, throughout the whole novel. So yeah, the different threads of her persona is part of character development because I write character-driven fiction. I felt like I had to know everything about her. Like if you were asked me questions about things that were not in the book, I should be able to answer them. I really should. Like favorite color, favorite food. I should know all those things. And I do refer to like that she loves basil and things like that. But it's just part of writing character-driven fiction is to feel like this person's real and they're multi-dimensional. They're not just this, plot-driven, only do one thing kind of character. That I like to read myself. I like to read character-driven fiction is my thing. I just love it. So I want to be totally immersed in the life of this character and have the rest of the world disappear while I'm reading it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just following up on my earlier question, and I think you pretty much answered this, how you felt about just, writing those interpersonal relationships with Teresa's marriage to Luke and, her work and friends community. How I mean, was that very painful to write? Was it, I love, by the way, that you seem like, you let the character speak to you. And when you had said earlier, I hear voices, does that sound weird? The reason I shook my head no is because I talk to a lot of writers and I get it. There are different ways that people write, but a lot of times characters just sort of pop into existence and won't let you go until you tell their story. So I do appreciate that. So once again, yeah, what drove your writing process with that?
Well, she was in my head and as you said, she wouldn't let go. And she did things I didn't agree with. As you know, because you read the novel, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but she made some kind of, not great decisions along the way and had to deal with those, the consequences of those decisions. And I felt like that was fun for me. I mean, it was fun for me. It was fun for me that I was surprised, as hopefully you were surprised. There were some plot twists that I really did not anticipate until they happened. And I said, oh, this is going to happen. And that's like, I can't believe that happened. And it sounds weird, but she had her own way of being in the world. And I felt like I was more the facilitator than the director. I couldn't say, no, Teresa, don't do that. It's a really bad idea. You're going to have bad consequences. She would just do it anyway. And isn't that how life is? You can't stop your best friend who's in a bad relationship and you want to say, don't marry that person. This is really going to work out badly. You can't do that. You just have to let it happen and then be there to pick them up when it doesn't work out, because we don't get to direct other people's lives unless we're writers. And then we do. But even then, I couldn't do it. It was out of character for her not to make those mistakes. And so she had to make mistakes. It is really how we learn. And, so she was not without bad decisions, nor was her husband. I think bad decisions happen. And even their son, who I liked very much, he's a minor character, but he was kind of fun for me to write. He's a college, and I worked teaching college for a long time. And just the fact that he does, he says some kind of sexist, awful things about his girlfriend at one point, and she bites her tongue because she understands where he's coming from. And I like that. That was really, I want to say, kind of fun for me to write, because I felt that it rings true that when we're angry, we say stupid things, and that ultimately we come back. So she directed me, and I had to let her fall again and again, which honestly is how we learn, isn't it? And I was a therapist, so the therapy, even though I never did that kind of therapy, I never directed people to write letters or any of that. It felt like it organically emerged that was going to happen, that she had to have closure with her daughter. And just to tell listeners who haven't read the book opens 10 years after the daughter was killed. So that is not a spoiler. It is in the first page, because the book really isn't about the death so much as it's about the after effect of death and long grief. And long grief happens. It's a thing. It happens, every one of us. And sometimes we don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know. It may be, you lost a friend and you think, well, I could get over this. And then it really isn't something you're getting over very easily. And what is getting over anyway? When people
Yeah.
are part of your life and you love them, you never really get over the loss of them. You move on and you do your life, but you never really get over it. It impacts you, pretty much your whole life. At least that's how I feel about it. I think it's really hard to be a thinking and feeling person and not carry that.
So what are some of the things you're reading right now?
I am really immersed in this book, and my husband have been like talking out loud all the time when I'm reading it, saying, wow, this gives me ideas, because I have another novel finished that I'm trying to sell that's very different from this one. And it's called Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. And have you read it? It's extraordinary. And I think what's really extraordinary about it, and I'm not quite done with it, is the fact that she does something I never thought of doing, but I'm gonna do, which is add in a lot of backstory very late in the novel. And it makes all the difference. I mean, it is so surprising. Like it's the whole novel is really, really surprising, but that part really took me aback. I didn't see it coming, and I love it. I really love it. I loved, I'm adding to a chorus here, but I loved James by Percival Everett. That was a recent read that I loved. I'm a huge fan of Colin McCann. In fact, I'm such a huge fan that I used him in the book club, because I just think he is somebody who continually reinvents himself with every novel. And that is what I aspire to do, that you wouldn't pick up a novel and say, oh, that's a Lisa Taylor novel. You'd say, wow, I didn't see that that's related to her last one. I mean, I think that's what we as artists have to do, is to reinvent ourselves and to have our characters so different. So yeah, I'm an avid reader. I read 1 to 2 books a week. Probably you do something similar, but it's my world. I mean, you can't write without reading, right?
Thank you so much, Lisa. It was a pleasure. Check out The Shape of What Remains. It is lovely. I'm very curious to hear what you're looking to sell next, since you said it's so different, but I don't know if you want to spoil anything on here, because I know that when you're going through that process, it gets very precious.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
Yeah.
tell you that it's in 2 voices, a male and a female. So it is a very different type of story.
Thank you so much. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was Lisa C. Taylor, and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.